Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today's another episode of Daily Cyber, episode 268. Today, I was supposed to have a guest on. He had to cancel last minute, completely understand. Anyone that works in the cybersecurity industry knows things pop off, and meetings come up. So this meeting came up at last minute. They messaged me earlier this morning, just to let me know. So didn't give me a chance or time to book someone in. So today's going to be an Ask Me Anything. I'm going to be going through some topics that I think is of interest when it comes to cybersecurity and my journey. I'm going to be talking a little bit about that today. So I want you guys to go into the chat. If it's on Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn, let me know. Just put your questions in the chat. I'm going to cover a lot of information about my journey, what I've been kind of going through over the last 2 years, especially not doing stream, where I've been at, what I've been working on. So a lot to cover. So let's hack at it. Okay, so there's been a lot going on, and I think, a lot of us are looking at the industry and like, how do we evolve? How do we kind of move up? And I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey. If you've never met me or if you've been following me for quite some time, I've come from a background of IT, marketing, sales, and then moving up slowly into cybersecurity, going into cybersecurity sales, because trying to learn how to break into the industry, right? A lot of times when I first started to try to break in the industry, was talking about degrees. You need a degree, you need some certifications, you need all that. If not, you're not even going to get an opportunity. You're not going to get a chance to get into the industry and really, prove that you can be, a good subject matter expert in the industry. So I got into sales, drove in sales for a little bit, learning about different manufacturers, different products, different solutions, selling it, advising clients on how to utilize everything from endpoint protection to penetration tests to vulnerability scanning to firewall sales to different innovative technologies. I worked with one of my friends, Eric Frempong, and he was always on the cutting edge of leading technologies and what they were promoting. So kind of worked my way through that. Ended up looking at an opportunity when, thanks to Neil, I had a discussion because I was kind of concerned, I didn't have any experience in instant response. And I had an instant response company reach out to me and say, "Hey, we're interested. Would you like to apply for this position?" And I was like, you know what? I don't know if I have the skill set to be able to do that. So I talked to Neil, and Neil said, "You know what? Go for it. Like, it's going to give you a lot of insight of what you already know when it comes to IT, what you know about security, but it's going to be a real deep in the sands, quicksand learning, because you're going to be in the weeds, right, when it comes to incidents and learning what organizations go through." So took his advice, applied, went through the interview process, got the role of an incident response lead with this incident response company. And my knowledge catapulted just quickly, because a lot of times when I was looking at what I was selling, what I was promoting, and you guys all know this, if you guys heard salespeople, this next generation, it's going to protect you against everything. You're never going to be compromised. It's going to help you protect you against all ransomware incidents. And then hearing clients go through an engagement and have that technology in their environment. So then you start asking other questions like, was it configured properly? Did the team have the necessary expertise to configure it and to maintain it? Was it being maintained ongoing? Like, those questions started to come up, and I started to learn more and more. And as I was going through instant response, I started to be really strong at being advising. Just because from my background and from my experience, I was able to articulate solutions, technology, speak to executives, partners, MSPs, MSSPs, council, carriers, things along that line, and be able to collaborate with them, jointly through the worst situation this company is going through. So through that, I was fortunate. Kevin Baker gave me an opportunity. He was the director of the Cyber Strategy and Defense Department. He gave me an opportunity to come over to be an advisor. So a vCISO advisor, some people call it fractional. He gave me the opportunity to come over And then that just opened the door of what I know, what I learned about the incident, right? And what clients are going to now helping them after an incident and helping them be more reactive in the situation, because they're reacting to the situation of how to, improve their security posture, harden their environment. And as they all say, is try to never have that situation happen again. And then sometimes I would get clients that were proactive. They're coming in and saying, hey, we know you're experts in this field. We don't want to go through a ransomware event or network intrusion or a business email compromise. Can we meet with you guys ahead of time and start being proactive, getting the right things in place, having an assessment done, and kind of going through that process? So did that for a couple of years, and which led me to like the last, I'm gonna say 6 months. There was a layoff on my organization. Unfortunately, I got laid off. Gave me an opportunity to take a breath, breathe, kind of figure out what my options are. And then I ended up opening up my own company as a fractional vCISO. And now I'm working with great partners. I have, a handful of clients I work with and some great partners that I'm working with when it comes to referring clients to me, or as well as, co-managing, I'll call it, clients with them to start to work on improving the security posture, giving them advisory, services, as well as looking at how we can improve their client's security posture so they don't have to go through any incidents. So that's been my journey for the last couple years, right? And I wanted to share that because some of the questions come as like, okay, how do we do it? How do we get, move from the position that we're currently at to a new position, right? If it's maybe more technical or maybe more managerial, like how do we do that? Some advice I'd recommend on my side is, one, make sure you become a subject matter in your area. Understand your business, understand what you're doing, understand the technology. Second, in the technology stream, understand how that relates to the business, right? I can throw a whole bunch of different solutions, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, whatever that may be, firewalls, you name it. I can throw all those solutions at clients, but does it matter? Does it make sense for what they need? And a lot of times you have to understand is what's their risk appetite and how is that solution going to reduce that risk, right? So if you're putting an endpoint protection in place, EDR, we call it, if you're putting that into an environment, is it going to help to reduce their risk of being compromised? Majority of the time, yeah, but it has to be implemented properly. It has to be tuned properly. It has to be, the alerts have to be managed, right? You have to have someone monitoring those alerts. But when you have all those in place, yes, it's going to reduce the risk, right? Then you're going to be quicker to respond to an alert that now is a minor incident versus being a major incident where someone gets in the environment, they start to move through that system and now move laterally to servers, to data, to critical systems. And then all of a sudden there's an actual ransomware, a data exfiltration event. So understanding the systems, understanding how they relate to the business. And then the last thing I would say, just in that stream, just give you three, is now how to speak to the business, senior leadership, technology partners, also external third-party partners, how to talk to them and collaborate with them properly. Like the business people are going to think more about business. The MSPs are going to think about, how they can get in the environment and they can co-manage or manage that solution by closing that deal and working with you. And does it make sense, right? Do you have the expertise internally, right? And then with your internal teams, how to get your internal teams, and sometimes they call them stakeholders, invest into what you're talking about. And you have to think about, it's better to cut twice or measure twice and cut once. Go slower through that process, right? Understand what the challenges, understand what their concerns are. Don't come in and say, we need to get this, and that's the only thing. I don't know, use an example. Say two-factor authentication on privileged accounts. We need to get that. We need to get it. We need to implement it right now. This business is completely vulnerable. There's nothing else than just two-factor authentication. You need to get it right now. You're not wrong in that thought process, but the thing is, how do you collaborate? Right? How do you collaborate with your team, your stakeholders to find out where is that on their priority and how can you work with them to move that up in their list of priorities? Right. So there's things along that line is communication and collaboration. So want to give you that insight. Now on the managerial stream is understanding the technology and that conversation, and then understanding how does it improve the business? How does it improve profits, risk. It reduces risk and liability. How does it help? And I had a conversation today about insurance, right, and compliance and regulatory. So all these things you have to understand, and then how to be efficient in running those, right? Be cost effective for the organization. Now, if you're an MSP, how to be, cost effective for your clients. All those will help you move up in management because you understand a lot of it's driven by, finances. If you can help the business be secure and help them to maintain their budget, they're going to love you, right? Because they want to say, where can we spend, efficiently in these controls, but also cover the bases that they don't want to spend their whole budget on one control. They want to make sure they're diverse in their controls, that they're covering different areas of security that they need to implement to meet certain maturity levels, compliance, regulatory, insurance, whatever that may be. So if you guys have any questions with that, let me know. I'm going to jump into some other topics here, things that, I find that, I'll say more and more people are asking me about. And I think it's something that maybe you guys are interested, maybe you're not. I know one question I got just recently, like, what's the difference between vCISO and a full-time CISO? Like, what makes more sense for an organization? Before I answer that, I'm going to give just a second. I'm going to talk for a little bit before I want to see if you guys have any questions about that, or if you have a thought. vCISO, full-time CISO, what was your thought on what would be more beneficial for an organization? And everyone has their opinion on this. Nothing's wrong. It's good to have an open dialogue and discussion about it. I think, and I'm going to kind of give my insight here, I think it depends on the size of the organization and their budget, right? If you have, say, a mid-size, smaller organization, maybe even a larger organization that might have more beneficial spend on their budget on technology, security, than actually hiring someone for $250,000 to $400,000 for a vCISO position. If they can hire a fractional vCISO for a fractional of the cost, and I mean, depending on the vCISO, you've got anyone's from, $40,000 US to maybe $60,000 annually, versus, like you're saying, 250. I've heard some of the lower end vCISOs to 400,000 plus, USD. So if I can, I'm just going to use round numbers. If I could hire someone for $50,000 for the year for a fractional vCISO, that rest of my budget, and say we're using 250,000, I can now spend $200,000 on security controls. I can look at, allocating that budget now to what other, technology do I need in the system? DLP, SIM, EDR, whatever that may be. Now I can invest in that and harden the environment. So that's where you have to think it. Now, with compliance and regulatory, a lot of time they're asking, do you have a subject matter expert, vCISO or CISO, in the environment that is governing your environment, that can be accountable and is managing everything when it comes to security? So this is another thing to think about. If it's more cost effective to have a fractional vCISO while implementing the security controls, it makes more sense. Now, when you work with larger organizations, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies and above, a lot of times they have a CISO in place, right? It makes more sense. So think of along that lines of size of organization, security budget, especially holistic budget, not just like resources and people, like employment, but the whole budget on its whole. When you're an executive, you think about that. Like, can I allocate some of that budget towards what I need to cover? So it's really important to think about that when you're looking at, now, depending on the role. And I'm going to give an example. I know a lot of great fractional vCISOs that are equivalent in knowledge, expertise, advisory, experience as a CISO, but they've decided to go the fractional vCISO role because they like to work with different organizations and different industries. I know some people that have gone CISO because they like to be with one organization and focus on that one organization. There's no wrong path. It's just now looking at their level of expertise and knowledge and what can they give you when it comes to that expertise in your environment to help you improve your security posture, but also get you a point where you now can maintain that security program ongoing, right? And that could be compliance and regulatory, audits, questionnaires that come in, reviews of your systems, be it Active Directory, permissions, data classification, you name it, right? Audits of your firewalls, anything along that line. So I think right now it's really looking at that expertise that's going to help you in the organization. Now, got a question here. vCISO are more risk advisories versus true CISOs and companies that actually drive security and risk aversion with the organization. Depending on the vCISOs, for myself, when I go into an organization, I'll do a business risk assessment and a business continuity plan, and I'll work through the risk assessment, the business continuity plan, disaster recovery, and the incident response, going through that from start to finish. I think it depends on the level of experience of the advisor and their methodology of working with an organization. There's some vCISOs, right, that come in and are more project-based. They come in, they're running through a project, helping them get through the questionnaire or helping them get their controls up and running some sort of framework, be it the CIS, Center for Information Security, NIST, ISO. They're running that framework to a point, and then they're checking out. They're saying, you guys have got it. We can maintain it far. And then there's some that, like myself, like to get embedded in the organization. Talk to the CFO, talk to CIO, understand the actual business, the business practices, help understand sales, manufacturing, whatever that may be, and understand all the departments and understand that risk portfolio, and then advise on best practices, policies, documentations, standing operating procedures. On top of that, looking at compliance and regulatory, and driving that initiative of like a GRC, a governance risk compliance program for the organization. So totally agree. Some vCISOs are risk-based. They come in, get in there, talk about the risk, improve their security posture, and then have kind of a baseline. And then from there, they kind of look at, okay, does the client still want to continue, or do they kind of move out? Some advisors, and again, the vCISO advisors, look at the whole financial model, the risks of the organization, look at the budgets, I even some companies and clients I work with, I help them with hiring resources, right? So I'll be part of the interview and hiring process, right? And their IT as well as security team. So hopefully that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, let me know. Now, one thing I want to add into this is the fractional vCISO. Something I've learned, and I'm going to just put this out there. Whenever I go into an organization, I always go in as a collaborative resource, not I'm a vCISO, I know what I'm talking about, right? This is what you do, and this is how I'm doing it. I always ask questions. And try to get into a collaborative understanding of the environment, what they've done so far, what they've implemented, who do they work with, how do they work with them? Because what happens is you're going to work with that team ongoing for many, many hours, hopefully many years. And you want to have a collaborative approach. When something comes up, they're going to trust you, not, okay, here comes Brandon, right? He's going to come and tell me I've done something wrong, or he's going to scrutinize what I just did. You want to have that open dialogue, and it doesn't matter in that holistic view if it's an outside partner to internal stakeholders to your team that you work with. You want to have that collaborative approach. Next follow-up question: how many clients do most fractional CISOs take on? Okay, so let's talk about the business model. Right, I'm going to give you kind of under the hood. As a fractional vCISO, you have to understand how many hours you can work per week, per month. And you have to look at your cost analysis, right? If I work so many hours, if I work 10 hours a week with a client, what do I have to build them so I can cover my baseline costs, right? Operational costs, right? And then be able to maintain going forward, right? Maintain my expenses and doing all that. So depending on how much you can get your bill rate to, is it $250 an hour? Is it $300 an hour? Is it $350? And how many hours you're working with that client. Is it 1 hour a week? Is it 10 hours a week? Will tell you how you look at how many clients you can take on. Now, solo fractional vCISO, you could probably take on roughly an estimate. I would say anywhere from 4 to 10 clients, depending on how many hours you are taking on per engagement. Like if you're doing 1 hour a week and it's 4 hours a month, you could probably take on more, clients. But if you start doing 10 hours a week, right, and you do 4 clients, that's 40 hours a week, right? So you got to think about not burning yourself out, and you got to think of operationalize too. Is if you're on your own as a fractional vCISO, you have your invoicing, your accounting, your billing, your note taking, right? You have all your business, administration you have to do on top of working with your clients and your billable hours that you're doing that, and you have to track all that and have those systems in place. So eventually you might hire some people out, and you might hire and it's kind of funny. I was talking to a colleague of mine about this morning. Key area of, if you're going to run your own business, something I always recommend people, you have this team involved. You have an accountant, you have a lawyer, you have a financial advisor, and depending on what your level of business is and experience and knowledge, you might want to have a business consultant, right? Someone that can advise you on business strategies. Those are just the main team you should have in your close-knit business team to help you drive your business. If you have any contracts, statement of work, master service agreement, statement of work, you have to review contracts for partnership agreements, right? You're hiring on contractors, 1099. You're looking at any type of employment agreement. You might want to have that the lawyer review those contracts, right? Just to make sure you cover all your bases. Your finances, depending on where you're in the world, you want to make sure that you're looking at your gross profit, you're looking at your revenue, you're looking at your taxes and your overhead costs, right? You want to make sure you're doing all that so you're not, and a mistake I had a colleague do, a friend, when he started his business, it's going to date me, but way back in 1997. Yeah, 97, he started his business. He thought gross profit was all his money. So he spent it all. So if he made $200,000, he spent all $200,000, but he didn't allocate any for taxes, anything along that line. So he got caught in the end of the year. So all this information I'm giving you, understanding your hours, understanding your bill rate, understanding how that comes in as your profit, your gross profit, understanding your operations costs, understanding like your net profit and EBITDA, after taxes, how much do you have that you can start to utilize for the business and how much you can pay yourself will tell you how many clients you can take on. And then having that bill rate specifically in the sense that I have this line of expenses, and a lot of people need to do financial, overview of their expenses. How much is your output, your losses, I'll say, for per week, per month, of your expenses, right? If you say, and I'm just using an example, say you spend $5,000 a month in your expenses, mortgage, car insurance, health insurance, whatever that may be, and it comes up to 5,000. You don't want to break even making 5,000. You want to be making like $7,500 to $10,000, a month in revenue and gross revenue, and then pay your taxes, kind of work that way down. So then you can make a salary that you have some for savings and you have some to pay your expenses. Right now, I'm not saying take it all, but you got to budget that out. Now, if you ever have any questions about that, please talk to your financial advisor, talk to your accountant. They'll help you through that. And if you have any other questions, just message me. Next question. If you had to mentor your younger self to become a CISO, what skills and titles would suggest earning? Okay. So if I was going to mentor myself, my younger self, say when I was 21, I'll give you actually this example. Say in 2000, when I was going to Trias College and going to IT, if I could go back now and say, okay, look, I'm gonna lay out a roadmap for you, because what you're doing is great, but I'm going to streamline that's going to cut down 10 or 15 years for you, so you can start to get into that vCISO, CISO role. The first thing I would say is understand business, right? Understand business inside and out, and specifically look at your risk of being a business. If it's financial risk, is it technology risk? Is it manufacturing? Is it sales? Understanding the risk of the business and how a business could be impacted in all different areas of the business, right? Understand the financials of a business, right? Go through that. Next, learn how to communicate. Talk about negotiation, collaborative discussions. Understand how to articulate your point and work with someone, not just download, right? A lot of times when I was learning to be a motivational speaker, get out there, they just talked about like, drinking by the fire hose. You just download a whole bunch of information. Clients go like, I don't get this, right? I don't understand. I learned a skill, and I'm going to share this with you. It's a pro tip here is before I jump into any information, I ask the person across the table, across the video, do you have any questions for me? And I wait to them go, because a lot of times they'll address that. Well, I have a concern here. I have something I'm thinking about here. We're working on this here. And at least I know where to tailor my conversation versus if I talk over here on the left, I might not be on the same conversation with the person that I'm talking to. So I align with that. Second is I take breaks and check in. So I might give some information, we're talking about the vCISO and all that. Did that make sense? Do you have any questions about that? I take a break and then go back in it because I want to make sure they're getting the information and it makes sense. Or if there's something they're coming across and going, okay, hold on, Brandon, I have a question. So you're talking about getting this team, learning about business, learning about like, okay, where do I do that, right? Do I go to a library? Do I go to the internet? What do I do? Now, back in the day when I'm talking like in 2001, you potentially have to go to like the library or find some mentors that that run a business and ask them if they can have an hour of their time per week for the next 60, 90 days and just have lots of questions. And I know for myself, just thinking this through, you could go to night school courses, right? When it comes to college or university and take a business course too. So there's different avenues that way. But communications is important. How do you communicate to your partners and the people you're working with? So that's what I advise my younger self. And then the next thing I would say is go out and volunteer your time, right? When I was younger, I'd say volunteer, start talking about security, start doing cybersecurity awareness training, talk about security, start getting out there. The more you do that, the more people are going to start to look at you as an expert, and the more they're going to ask you for more advice. Get into that, start working with, charitable organizations, non-for-profits, look for smaller organizations like SMBs that are starting out. Start to go in, ask them if you can volunteer and help them out. Once you get to a certain point, maybe do an assessment, you ask them some questions, say, look, there's stuff you need to work on. Then I would start looking at how to advise them and start looking at consulting and then work my way up from there. That would be my advice. Let me know if there's any other questions on that one, but that's a great question. So talking about vCISO, CISO, the next thing I wanted to jump in is what executives really need to know about cyber risk. All right. Now, when you're looking at that, I think all of us listening to this kind of go, okay, the biggest risk is having a threat actor come in the environment and then being able to compromise it in some way. Either one, data exfiltration, data exfiltration and or ransomware itself, some form of denial of service or interruption, right, in the environment. One thing I was talking to a client this morning about was financial loss, right? Being socially engineered for the ACH transfers, right? Money transfers and wire transfers, right? So when you're looking at things along that line, executives think about where are all the risk in my organization that's going to impact the business to function. Like look at that high level. Then they look at operations, right? They look at what can impact operations. They look at storms, power outages, failure of equipment. They have to look at IT. Is the IT redundant? Then they look at security too. Like, can it be compromised in some way? So they look at that type of risk and then they evaluate the likelihood of that risk. And I'll give you an example. Like I'm in Toronto, Ontario. The likelihood of us having a tsunami, extremely unlikely. But the likelihood of us having a heat wave that will affect the transformers and take us out of business is fairly likely, right? I know we've had one power outages in the last probably about 30 days, 60 days because of the heat, but it was a rolling blackout where it went out for a couple minutes and then came back on. But, did I lose any data? Did anything happen on that line? Did any other organization? Did I have an uninterrupted power supply or a transformer or a backup power supply that I could start in my system? I wasn't too worried because I don't really have, most of my systems are not critical, but when you look at organizations, that's potentially a risk, right? So they look at the likelihood of that risk, and they look at what's the actual impact. If the impact, and I'll look at the kind of the loss, expectancy. If that impact is going to affect me, that I'm going to lose $100,000, for every hour that's down. I'm going to create some sort of solutions from redundancy and failover. If I'm going to lose, $2,000 a year because it's down, I'm probably going to accept that risk. I'm going to say, yeah, it's down. It's minimal. It's a minimal impact in the organization. I'm just going to put, accept that risk. If it goes down, it goes down, right? Whatever. We'll come back up when it comes back up, or I'll just spin up another solution for that. So you kind of look at that appetite of what they can take on. So something to think about too is what's the impact on their compliance and regulatory? What's the impact on their clients, right? So the clients, you look at, will it impact sales, delivery, the life cycle of the client in any way? If it does, then yeah, organizations will look at, having a smaller appetite for that outage and that impact. And this is where you look at the risk assessment, the business continuity plan. If that's a critical system to maintain business continuity, they're going to have that part of that assessment and the business continuity of how they're going to restore or fail over to another system. Now, I'm going to take a pause there. I know that's a lot of information. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm going to jump in. I think there's another question that came in. Do incidents come into play as well for vCISOs, or normally is that still down to the ops team? The chance of multiple orgs get consult having an incident at the same time must be low, but isn't zero. So good question. When you're dealing with multiple clients, you're hoping you've got the maturity. Now, I'm going to give a life cycle here. If you're starting out with a client and you're building up the maturity in the security program, the likelihood of them having an incident can be high. And yes, the vCISO, because you're the subject matter expert, or at least in the first 90 days, you're still spinning up to understand their environment, what they're doing, but they might want to have you on those calls. So you might be on those calls with the incident response team, their breach coach, which is their legal counsel, their insurance, their forensics team, their MSP or MSSP or MSP. You might be on those calls. So you're hoping, knock on wood, you don't have 3-4 clients that got hit by something at the same time. So the likelihood that you might get hit by one client might get hit might be there. As a vCISO, you got to expect that you are going to be asked to be engaged in that incident. Like I have, as a fractional vCISO, I've been engaged even on my own with clients that have had incidents. I remember when I was working for that incident response company, there's times I got pulled in engagements because they wanted to have a senior person there, and I had good knowledge of the organization, their team, and what they're doing. So they wanted me to come and speak to that and help them strategize on where they need to go. So think about that. I mean, you're the expert in that organization that's going to help them drive that security program or help them get through that incident. So it's very important for you to be there, especially on their mind, right? Now, I'm going to put this out there. Some fractional CISOs work 9 to 5 and have in their incident response plan that they have an incident response company that they will refer to. And then they're just spun up throughout the day, 9 to 5, when they have their touch point meetings and things along that line. So it depends how you run your business, and depends about due diligence and due care. The more you care about being a CISO, the more you're going to be more engaged, right? Because you take it on as your responsibility. The less you care about that, the more 9 to 5 you're going to work. And that's just the truth of the matter, right? I'm not calling anyone out. I want to be very clear. Everyone has the right to run their business and be a vCISO how they want to be, but how they should be, I think, is a different story, because you are taking on the responsibility of being that leader in that organization when it comes to cybersecurity. You might be what they call fractional, right? Or virtual, right? Where you're not working on a full-time base in those hours, but the responsibility, due diligence I take on as being that person is still the same. I would take the advice and guidance. I have colleagues I work with now. I'm going to throw out his name, Kevin Baker. He works as a CISO. If he was recommending and guiding me on doing something as a CISO, I would totally listen. I wouldn't say, no, that's not, I'm a fractional CISO. I wouldn't do that. No, if you're saying do this as a CISO, definitely I'm taking that advice and looking how I can, if I'm not implementing it, how I can implement that strategy. So I want you to really think about that. And this is why there's good training and books out there. CISSP is a great one. I'm actually going back through the training again. I want to get my certification, but going back through and getting that baseline of how to be a CISO and looking at the CISSP, the 8 domains. There's a lot of books out there too. If you guys ever want, message me on LinkedIn. There's some books I'm reading too, as from experts that have been CIOs, chief information officers, as well as vCIO or CISOs, and talking about how they develop their program, how they manage their program. And some of them are Fortune 100 companies. So taking that information and making that your own, your methodology and strategy, how you work with organization, I think is key. So great question. So going back to the executives really need to know about cyber risk. So I talked about, acceptable, their appetite, the solutions technology, what they're looking at. I believe the whole organization, the executives, board of directors, the IT team, the security team, the MSP team, all should go through a tabletop exercise together and understand their roles when it comes to an incident and how to collaborate and communicate together. In the last organization I worked with, I helped develop it was an executive incident response program, which we took a team through evaluating their team, a client, through evaluating their policies, the business continuity plan, disaster recovery, the incident response plan, help them to mature them to a certain level, train them on the life cycle and how it would work through an incident response, and then take them through a tabletop exercise that we'd score. And I think that's crucial for every organization to go through, because what happens is, as you guys know, is you get your policies, you review them against your technical controls and make sure everything's in place. You do the training so you understand the life cycle of how an incident's going to kick off, the swim lanes you're going to go through, to the point of when you're going to actually finish that incident, have a debriefing. So you go through that, and now you test it in a scenario where someone goes, okay, we're going to give you a close to real world scenario, and it's going to be all verbal. You're not going to test systems. You're not going to try to do recovery backups, or you're not going to bring down systems and bring them up. You want to go through the methodology and the timelines and I'll call the stressors. It's kind of like a stress test of going through that type of engagement. Because what you want to see is, when you're going through it, can they respond? Do they understand the systems? Do they understand their incident response plan? Do they understand the disaster recovery? Does it work like they think? For example, I had a client talking about their incident response plan and the backups. And they're like, we have off-site backups that we can get them within 24 hours. I said, great. We went through the scenario, talked about that. In the scenario, we had their backups, corrupted and encrypted, right? On site, the restoration, so they couldn't do it. So they had to get their off-site backups. And then we said, okay, fine. What we want you to do is we want you to walk through that process. And their partner was there, walk through that process. And they ended up finding out through the engagement that it takes 72 hours, not 24, to get their drives. From taking the drives, exporting them, scanning them, shipping them out, can take up to 72 hours for them to get it on site, and then for that client to start restoration. So think about that, right? If you're down, it's $10,000 a day, right? $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 you're now out. Right now, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 you're out because you can't restore yet until you get your backup. So those are the things that we want executives to understand, because they make better decisions and get the right partners, set up the proper SLAs, right? So happens the service level agreements, right? That help to deliver in the time when they're going through an incident. You want to do that proactively versus through the incident, right? The biggest thing that we know is you don't want to start trying to figure this out when you're going through a ransomware event. You're tired, you're fatigued, you've been running for a week to 2 weeks straight. You're completely exhausted. And now you have to try to work with the partner and see if you can get this, or you're trying to get hardware, you're trying to do all that. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get burnt out. All right. And I've seen it working in incident response. I've seen clients get frustrated. I've seen people get upset. I've actually seen to the point where people have quit in the middle of the engagement, quit the organization, not the engagement, but actually left. I had one, I was in a meeting, in a call, and we were talking through something, and I understood the team was stressed and overwhelmed, and I'm trying to level set and give them the expectation. And then their senior security engineer hung up off the call. So we had the CEO, we had the CIO, we had the breach coach. I don't think the insurance was there. We had forensics and the team, my team is, and they were like, we were just talking. Is everything okay? Like, did something happen? So we got off the line. I talked to the CEO, and he said, yeah, he just quit. He just left. He says, I can't handle this anymore. Fortunately, the CEO talked to him. They worked something out, and he came back on the next call, which is the next day. But it happens. It's a stressful event, right? And sometimes going through a tabletop exercise gets you to the point where you understand your stressors through the environment, be it people, process, or technology. Any questions about that? I know that I covered a lot there. The next thing I want to go into, and I know I got another about 20 minutes. Keep the questions coming, guys. These are great questions. How to build a security program, right, that actually works. I know a lot of people have their different methodologies and what they do. I'm going to talk about mine and what I do to build out a security program. So I take a security assessment, be it CIS, you can do NIST as well, depending on the organization. And you do a security gap assessment. You look at what do they currently have? What's the level of maturity, right? Do they have any automation or innovation tied to that helps them to be more efficient? Do they have any policies tied to it, right? And then how is their reporting, right? Can they evaluate if that control is working properly? And are they monitoring that report and seeing how it's doing? Because I'll give you an example. And we've all heard of it, there's shelfware, right? Or shelf solutions. Someone buys something, puts it in the environment, slightly kind of in the environment, but then doesn't touch it, thinks it's running perfectly. Well, working in IR, instant response, you hear about those incidents and you realize if that system wasn't set up properly, that's how it wasn't detecting and responding. And that's how the threat actor got past a lot of the security controls that were in place that should have caught the activity and flagged or alerted the organization to suspicious or malicious activity so they could have stopped it. So looking at doing a proper assessment, right? And this can take some time, and I'll use my kind of benchmark, anywhere from, depending on the size of the organization, 25 hours and 50 hours plus, right? Depending on multiple locations, depending on, if they're in different countries, compliance, regulatory, whatever that may be. So you take that assessment, you evaluate the controls, the policies, right, the innovation as well as the reporting, and you score how they're doing, right? And you see where's their baseline. Are they, and I'll do a 1 to 5 score. Are they 1 to 3? Are they 3 to 4? Or are they 4 to 5? Now, I'm going to tell you, most companies, most organizations won't ever get a perfect score because there's some controls that just don't make sense, don't apply. And I'll use this as an example. Software development lifecycle, right? A lot of times you'll see in these controls, do you have a software development lifecycle? Do you develop software? And how do you harness and secure that? Well, some companies don't develop software. Some might write scripts, right? But they don't develop software. So they don't need a full software development lifecycle with waterfall and agile and all the different, processes and methodologies they follow. They just don't do it. They buy off the shelf, or they have maybe a partner that does it, that does have that software development lifecycle. They do due diligence. They might have SOC 2 type 2, whatever that may be. But when you're doing an assessment and you're going through and you see that there might be a 4 out of 5 or a 3.5 out of 5, and you look at some of the controls, you kind of realize it's not applicable. It's not applicable, right? But then the key to understanding the controls and not applicable is when you get insurance or compliance or regulator coming and asking you a question, Why don't you have, a software development life cycle you can speak to? Well, the organization doesn't do that. That's why we did not evaluate that control in our environment, and why it's become up at 0. It doesn't apply. So then you go, okay, and they understand that. But you have to be able to have that conversation. So like I said, to build the program, you got to understand that. So from there, you look at the risk portfolio. So you look at what's going to secure the environment quickly, lowest hanging fruit, or what is critical vulnerabilities. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes when I look at this, and I learned this from years experience, and you guys might have a different way of thinking, external to internal. So anything is external facing has higher criticality than something that's, in a development area that's in the environment that doesn't have access to the internet. So I have an application, web service, something that has even a client portal that's accessed externally, that will take more higher priority in the criticality of the security than something in the environment. So as I'm evaluating their systems, their critical systems, what they're working on, their network traffic, how employees are getting or partners are getting into the environment, I'll evaluate the external first, then the internal, and look at putting that as ranking those the critical systems or solutions that need to be implemented, and then work my way through that. And then I'll look at what will provide the biggest blanket for security, meaning EDR, endpoint protection. If I can get EDR saturated for all endpoints and set up properly and monitoring properly, that means I have visibility to any suspicious or malicious activity. If we're properly monitoring the console, I can start looking at alerts. I can start looking at suspicious and malicious activity. So that's going to be a check mark for me. Privilege accounts, right? Looking at privilege accounts and making sure they have least privileges, right? In the sense of restricting them onto the systems that relate to their job and duties, and then making sure they have two-factor authentication set up to their accounts, and then have log monitoring on their accounts to make sure that if someone tries to log into their account off hours, that is not heuristic on their activity. So if I work 9 to 5 and all of a sudden someone's trying to log into my account at say 2 a.m., I want the SIM to be alerting to that, right? And I want someone like a SOC monitoring that to now alert that, hey, that account's now potentially being chipped away. It's not being compromised yet, but it's someone's trying to brute force it. We're going to shut down access to that account. We're going to track that investigation to see where that IP address is coming from and see if we can block that IP address. Now, don't get me wrong. It's like whack-a-mole. They just spin up another, proxy or VPN, and then they go through another area, and then they're using another IP address. But at least you can see that activity. So I can lock down that account, and then at least I know someone can't compromise that. So looking at those controls, EDR, two-factor authentication on privileged accounts, looking at monitoring, log monitoring through the environment. So looking at having a proper SIM that has all my security logs, event logs from my critical systems going into that, so that someone's monitoring. Least privileges, cybersecurity awareness. Those are some of the low-hanging fruits that as through the program, I start to build out. Now, what I do is I build out a strategic, tactical, and operation plan. So take a look at what that is. Google that. The tactical plan is 1 year. Operation plan is quarter to quarter. So how it works on implementation is I normally go the tactical plan first. So I did the assessment. I put everything in the tactical plan, right? Here's what we've assessed. Here's kind of the different gaps in the environment that I want to look at the controls. I'm going to put in the technical plan of this is what I want to potentially work on this year, right? And then I look at, is that feasible for the organization? So we have a meeting. I go over and I review. I say, okay, here's the ones I rank as critical. Here's the ones that are maybe higher, and here's the ones that are medium, and here's the ones that are low. These are the ones I think we need to work on as soon as possible. Is that feasible? Do you guys sign off on that? If they sign off, I'll move those I'll copy them, put them in the operation plan, and start to schedule out when are we going to start to work on them, right? And I'll look at timing, budget, resources, things along that line, so I can start to operationalize those. From there, at a high level, I'll start tracking those and making sure we're hitting our milestones, right? We're going from When we said we're going to start to implement it, right? Or even we have to do a proof of concept. Say you have to do a proof of concept to test the environment. And I'm all for that. Test it, right, in a development area or in a small environment to make sure it works or we won't run into any problems. Test it, then look at implementation, right? Once everyone's signed off and is approved, it's moved forward. Then look at monitoring. And then we start to kind of check that off. Now, depending on the criticality, sometimes you'll have to work in multiple swim lanes. So you might be working on 3 or 4 initiatives all at the same time. And sometimes you have your internal team working on the initiative. You might have your MSSP working on the initiative, right? And you're doing that all at the same time. But you're going to track that to make sure that you hit your milestones. Now, with that, as the program goes through, I'll look at compliance and regulatory and see if this maps to a security framework, right? Like I said, Center for Information Security, NIST, ISO, and I'll start making sure that we're meeting that criteria of how it maps to that. So are we doing all the controls that we've identified through the security, gap assessment? Is it mapping to the actual framework? And are we meeting the need or the requirement for that control? And then I'll track that. And then what happens is, as we go through quarter to quarter, annually, I'll review that to make sure it's being managed properly and that we can sign off if any questionnaire comes in, compliance comes in, insurance comes in. We can answer that that's functioning properly versus, yeah, we did it in Q1 of 2025 and we haven't touched it since. The next thing, as I was going through that, so I do the gap assessment work through that. Once we get the gaps in the security posture to a certain level, I'll look at doing a vulnerability scan. Right? I'll look at, let's implement a vulnerability scan, see how we're doing, our patch management, anything we implemented, did we, open up any vulnerabilities or did not harden it properly, and then go through that first pass and then start hardening the environment. Once we feel mature enough that, okay, I think we're good. I think we don't know what we don't know is unsecure or could be compromised, then I would look at having a penetration test, right? And then get the remediation that, harden the environment, maintain it, and then I'd rinse and repeat. And this is an ongoing process. Let me know if you guys have any questions about that. I know that was a lot of information. So next thing I'll go into is the ROI of cybersecurity. How do vCISOs justify budget to executives? I find myself, as I'm having these conversations, it has to relate to the business. If I come in and say, hey, the risk of two-factor authentication on an administrative account is that the threat actor is going to get in and compromise the account and go through the environment and potentially exfiltrate critical data, a lot of times I get, well, what does that mean? I don't understand, right? What does that mean to me or the organization? But if I can go, okay, we have personal identifiable information, personal health information, copyright, secret information, intellectual property, client information, things along that line. And we need to secure that, because if we don't, the liability of having to go through insurance or having to report a data exfiltration or a compromise to our partners, to our clients, to the board of directors is something we don't want to go through. And it's a risk that we should not have to take, not implementing the right solutions. Normally I drive that conversation. Okay, then they go, okay, so what do we need to implement to reduce that risk, right? That those areas that you just mentioned, Brandon, won't get compromised. Well, one is like making sure our administrative accounts are hardened. One thing we have to do is least privileges, two-factor authentication. Because we have X amount of accounts, we need to do that. Maybe they do have Duo or Okta or something in the environment, and then you can just start to utilize it. Or maybe they have just a Microsoft environment, so you can just make sure two-factor authentication is enabled and working properly. You go, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is how the timeline is going to take and potentially the cost. Do you guys have the appetite? Because we want to reduce that risk. And a lot of times they'll go, okay, yeah, let's reduce that, because I don't want to go through that compromise and having to go through that report and saying we didn't do our due diligence. So through that process, a lot of times I'll go through that discussion about the high level security control, but then I have to go through the cost analysis. And I talked about that earlier. Does that impact on that server data, infrastructure, cloud solution, whatever that may be, does it have a financial impact to the business? And if it does, what's that cost, right? I'm going to use the example. Say they have an Azure development area, right? And if that ever got compromised, they just spin up another instance of Azure. Bob's your uncle, they're good. There's minimal downtime. There's not really any financial impact. Okay, that's fine. Say there's an ERP system, right? And through that ERP system, I have a lot of client data, client information, and it's on Azure, and the outage of that impacts their business and their operations where they can't function. Now you're looking at $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 an hour, whatever that may be. Now you're looking on the return on investment on the actual control versus the actual impact. So again, going back to the actual control or the incident, say it's $25,000 an hour, but the control to implement the security controls costs us, $2,500 a month. That makes business sense because if you put that in place, and sorry, let me add one more thing, the likelihood of that being compromised. Now, say for example, that ERP system, the likelihood of it is 1 in 100,000. Okay, you're probably going to you're going to accept that risk. But if it's like 1 in 5, 1 in 10, it's public to the internet. It's accessible. We have a lot of traffic going to it. You can see it, see the actual web interface or portal, whatever that may be, or login externally. The likelihood of it being compromised now becomes 1 to 5. Now that $2,500 a month now becomes more essential to implement on the control, because I'd rather pay $2,500 a month versus $25,000 an hour. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions about that. And talking about this, and I want to kind of go back to, looking at the ROI of cybersecurity. Something that organizations, and I have my notes here, that companies need to take into consideration is the impact of an incident holistically. You might think of the technology, the solutions, right? But sometimes they don't think about hiring resources, right? Hiring people to come in and help them. They don't think about any type of restoration costs, right? They don't think about the forensics, right? What it would take to do the forensics of extracting the data, having someone going through those drives, right? Being able to look at all the artifacts, give them a report of what their findings are. They take into consideration downtime, right? My systems are down. How much is going to cost to get me back up? But they don't look at the incident costs. Breach coast costs, a lot of times is covered by insurance. External operations costs or fees. So things along that line to take into consideration when you're doing your disaster recovery incident response plan is any additional costs and fees that might occur through that. And it's good to have an expert that knows that to go through that. Other than that, I think that's it I want to cover, because I know we have 2 more minutes of the stream. I'll give you guys another minute or so. Let me know if you have any questions, but I know we covered a lot of good information, I hope. And I think it's essential to know this information as you go through it. Like, know these areas of cybersecurity and how it relates to the organization, because as you're going through this, you're going to develop this knowledge. You're going to develop that, and being able to speak to each of these points that we talked about gives you a better understanding of how your security program is going to mature and how it's working. Is it effectively working so that you can manage the security environment and I'm not going to say 100% protected, but you're in a good place that if an incident happens, the plan and the strategy in place that you can react and have a minimal impact, right? Because I know a lot of times people say, oh, you do this and you're never going to have an incident. My point is, and going through organization incident response, you're potentially going to have an incident, the level of impact, right? How much is it going to impact you when it comes to the actual incident itself? Last question, any advice from someone trying to transition from retail to junior in college? Any advice from someone trying to transition? So if you're in retail, one of the things I would say is go out and get your your CompTIA Security Plus, right? If you get your CompTIA Security Plus certification, it's kind of the entry-level certification when it comes to cybersecurity. Right? Get you in the door. You can start looking at working as a security analyst, potentially at a SOC, anything along that line. Learning all of this information that we're talking about, watching Neil, myself, just consuming a lot of the information. And then, like I said before, going out and starting to volunteer some of your time at non-for-profits, right, that need help, get some hands-on experience helping them out with some security things. See if you can volunteer under someone too, right? If you have a colleague, see if you can volunteer and help them just to learn the ropes, get some of the hands-on experience, because what you learn in books and what happens in the real world sometimes is a gap. So you really want to make sure that you really get that information down, and then just go for it. Like, make this for your, and here's my recommendation and my challenge to you, Hector. For the next 90 days, consume yourself with cybersecurity. Spend at least an hour to 2 hours a day. Cybersecurity. If you have to study the security, the CompTIA Security Plus, hour to 2 hours a day. What does it mean? Do some research. If you're a topic you don't understand in the actual study guide, go through it, research it, ask lots of questions, right? Understand how it works, and then teach someone. Teach someone what you've learned, because if you can teach them, then you know the information. So if you have any questions, reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'd love to help you more on that one. Other than that, I want to thank everyone for coming out for Ask Me Anything. I really appreciate your time. I hope you learned a lot from this. Next week, we're going to have another guest on Daily Cyber, and just keep through your journey. Keep learning, keep developing. It's a great career to be in. It's challenging. It's a great career to be in, and there's a lot of people out here to help you. So don't forget, software is hackable, being connected is vulnerable. I'll see you next Daily Cyber.